We have all seen shocking acts of violence in the media. Some of these hit close to home. Hate-based violence leaves people injured and traumatized, sometimes even takes their lives. Beyond those directly impacted, it haunts the families of people hurt by it and leaves a stain on entire communities. The violent act of a single person can cause damage that ripples out and lingers much longer than the act itself.
You say you saw a short guy walking with a rifle in the middle of Westgate.
Correct.
What was he doing?
He was just he let two shots off, and then he was walking, and then when he hit the corner, he just started running.
Hello, my name's Armando Jr. Hernandez, and I'm gonna be the shooter of Westgate 2020. Let's get this done, guys.
When communities feel most desperate, it's important to remember that violence can be prevented. In preventing violence, the first step is to understand why it's taking place at all. What you just saw is not the first act of violence to result from incel ideology. Incels are a community existing largely on the internet, brought together by shared loneliness and the rage that stems from it. They are involuntary celibates, incels, and the community they form does not alleviate their loneliness, but instead fans the flames of their anger. Those that hold this ideology believe that women are to blame for their inability to form romantic relationships. They spur each other on to take action in a world they feel has treated them unfairly, and against the people they believe are to blame for this unfairness. In extreme cases, incelism can lead to acts of great violence, such as the one at a Santa Barbara sorority house in 2014, and most recently, the shooting at Westgate Plaza in Glendale, Arizona. In response to the violence already committed by the incel movement and the threat of violence in the future, we selected this group as the focus of our anti-hate campaign. After careful research and examination of other successful communication campaigns, we found that storytelling was incredibly successful in encouraging a change in attitude and behavior. We also found that many college freshmen experience some of the same feelings that emerging incels do. That is, loneliness or a desire for belonging. Because of this, we chose to focus on preventing early, college-age individuals from joining the incel movement and use narrative as our primary communication tool. Our team asked friends, family, and fellow Sun Devils to share their stories about times they felt lonely, isolated, or uncertain about their future, and about their path to overcoming these challenges. We took their stories and shared them in online spaces, using Instagram and Facebook as our main platforms. We recorded discussions of the same topics, struggles with the uncertainty starting college, loneliness, and finding community, and we turned it into a podcast on SoundCloud. All of these tools allowed us to run a campaign called Incite Insight, addressing a population susceptible to joining the incel movement. While we face some challenges during the process, our campaign continues to address the growing problem that incels pose on society.
We chose incels for our project because we have all witnessed some form of misogyny, sexual harassment, or sexual entitlement on campus, which are ideas central to the perpetuation of the incel movement. Upon further research, we saw how incels could create violence and extremism within their cultures. And given our position as college students, we wanted to use this opportunity to directly confront some of the ideologies we saw on campus.
One of the problems with the incel movement that I think is interesting but sad about them is that they tend to breed amongst themselves almost. And what I mean by that is somebody will say one thing and somebody else will parrot it, and they'll never solve their own problems because they'll be too busy retelling their own stories of woe is me and I can't believe this happened, or did you hear this? It's one big false narrative that they just keep recycling to themselves to make sure everybody's on the same page. And at the end of the day, as much as these people are capable of doing terrible things, I think they're also capable of doing great things once they get out of this, or once they are shown another way or another road that is not necessarily the same chat room they've been in for 5 or 10 years.
The concept of someone being part of a hate group because they're involuntarily celibate is a little bit laughable, a little bit absurd. And not taking this group seriously is what allows them to do so much damage.
I think there's a few reasons why we should be discouraging people from thinking of themselves as incels. The first is because the incel movement does motivate a very misogynistic way of thinking. And as we start moving forward and promoting gender equality in all of our institutions, it's important that we keep that misogynistic way of thinking out of everyone's mind, because we want to keep working towards something more progressive. But I also think that incelism does have a very high potential for violent and extreme forms of attack, such as the shooting at Westgate or the shooting at the Santa Barbara sorority house just a few years ago. So we really do want to be able to prevent some of those mass acts of violence before they even have the potential to start.
In order to ensure efficiency and effectiveness of our messaging strategies, we maintained a strict target audience. Our audience was narrowed down to Arizona youth in the age range of 16 to 26. Though our research suggested that incels are predominantly male, a significant female incel population also exists. In light of this finding, we chose to include both males and females in our target audience. Per a suggestion from an advisor at Southern Poverty Law Center, we also targeted those with an interest in gaming, as this interest appeals to many of those who identify with incelism. We believe that this audience includes youth at risk of joining the incel community, as well as those that may presently be involved with incel-related activities. Geographically, we limited our campaign to Arizona. ASU has the largest collegiate student body in the nation, and we felt that this would be an appropriate scope for our initial efforts. This would allow for us to capitalize on ASU's complementary resources.
Nearly all successful communication campaigns begin with sound theory. Theory helps us distinguish which variables are relevant and which are irrelevant, and that helps us understand where we should be focusing our attention. Once we know which variables are important, theory helps us interpret the relationships between those variables, leading to valid explanations and predictions. Finally, theory provides a frame for understanding our audience and for their reactions to our content. Our research was incredibly important for helping us make decisions. There was one key finding that emerged from both our data collection as well as from reading academic literature online and incel ratings online. It told us that many people are familiar with the term incel, as well as all of the connotations that go along with that word. We were guided by theory and ongoing research and decided not to include the term incel in our own messaging. That's because insights from reactance theory told us that our audience probably would have picked up on the fact that we were trying to reach them specifically. It's very likely that because we used the word incel, they would have rejected our message before they ever had a chance to read or internalize the content.
Our examination of existing research showed that people most likely to adhere to the incel mindset were young men between the ages of 16 and 26. We also found that women between those same ages were most likely to experience negative interactions with men who identify to some degree as incels. As the project progressed, we continued to search for information on message boards, in news stories, and on other online repositories to help us understand issues related to incel membership. We found messages from reformed incels and others who have left the group. We also found stories of men who used plastic surgery and other drastic means to try and fit in. We used these continuously evolving insights and new information to help refine and adapt our message, strategies, and social media posts. In designing the content for social media sites, we strove to make the posts appealing to our target demographic. We included photos of the story's authors to create a more personal narrative. The content was very cohesive, and we kept a consistent template and color scheme across all of our posts. This was part of our strategy to make our brand and campaign recognizable and memorable.
Our project's messaging was originally based on and inspired by Humans of New York, which is a project originally created by Brandon Stanton, in which he interviews people from different walks of life, mostly strangers off of the streets of New York, and he posts them in the form of short photo blogs on his social media. Something amazing about stories is that they can enable and inspire empathy in people, even if they've never met the person. Just a short photo blog can be enough to even compel a narrative or a community for those that have experienced similar experiences. So we wanted to use that and post stories about overcoming loneliness and isolation on our social media to show people that there are healthy ways of overcoming loneliness. And to incels specifically, doesn't necessarily have to rely on the loneliness cycle that we often see in incel forums.
Over the course of this project, we created several vehicles to reach our targeted at-risk population. Our social media pages on Instagram and Facebook and our podcast series on SoundCloud are very important to be able to not only be recognizable online, but also to be able to interact with other online users. To this end, our social media outreach pages were a core element of our campaign. From online advertising to posting relatable story content, our social media specialist provided quick and accessible content to promote our message. Secondly, our podcast helped to give our campaign a legitimate voice that could be heard by our target audience. The idea for creating a podcast series to play alongside our social media campaign was that it would act as another platform of relatability that would feature the voices of real people sharing their own experiences in a genuine way, without much scripting or prompting.
I was able to utilize a variety of success measures, but I largely focused on social media engagement. I believe that the project fared extremely well on our success measures. Our total impression numbers were over 115,000. Based upon these outcome measures, I would say this project was an extreme success.
Our analyses suggested that we exceeded our estimated measures of success. In regard to our social media funding, our final cost per 1,000 impressions came out to $4.27. Our cost per post engagement came out to only 35 cents, surpassing our expectations. We initially had strived for a goal of a couple of thousand impressions with a $500 budget allocated towards advertising and social media funding. The response we obtained was completely unexpected. Not only did we maximize our funding costs, but we also were able to witness how our stories impacted our audience. We had a variety of submissions from outside sources who simply wanted to share their story as well. Fiscally and socially, we were able to exceed our prospects while achieving our goal of directly impacting the community. This project was not without its challenges, but it proved to be an opportunity for learning and adapting.
One of the biggest challenges we faced in this project was the COVID-19 situation. It became impossible to meet in person for meetings, and it became impossible to do on-campus functions and activities.
We had to switch trains of thought and our methodology in order to accomplish it. But I honestly think that even though that was one of our biggest challenges, I think that was kind of an interesting turn of events that ended up working out a little bit better for us.
Our core strategy allows for the campaign to live beyond this program cycle and scale to other similar contexts and locations. We anticipate that, eventually, our social media followers would submit their own stories and contribute to developing content. Followers are encouraged to submit their stories, and we in turn post them, which generates more impressions, which in turn generates more followers and impressions. Although our campaign was adapted to ASU, our research suggests that this problem is widespread. Keeping consistent with the core concepts, our campaign could easily be adapted for virtually any university with content developed by and for the local student population. Our campaign, Incite Insight, gave us the opportunity to address incelism at its core, the loneliness and psychological distress that leads to violent outbursts. As opposed to taking an aggressive stance against this group and trying to erase their communities or mute their voice, we instead provided a peaceful alternative. Incels create community out of an effort to meet a basic human need, but the community they create buries them deeper in toxic ideology. Incite Insight strove to offer a way out. It is a community built around loneliness and struggle that instead offers solutions.